Baby-led weaning. What is it? Does it fit with a parent-directed approach to introducing solids? If so, how? I've asked Anne-Marie to join us for a conversation, and Karen Kurtz, an experienced contact mum, and Linda Gage, an experienced contact mum and lactation consultant. Joining us also are two young mums, Cassidy and Reagan, who have introduced solids using a balanced approach. Let's start the conversation now. Over to you, Linda.
Hi everybody, my name's Linda Gage. I'm originally from New Zealand, now living in California. I have 4 adult children and a grandbaby. I'm also a nurse and a lactation consultant. So I'm definitely dealing with these kind of questions often, but I've also been teaching and used the parent-directed approach with our own children and seeing that with our grandchildren. So what we're actually going to be talking about today is this period of what is technically called weaning, which is the first time you introduce something other than milk, which is usually around the 6-month mark, until like around the 12-month mark or beyond, when baby is pretty much just having family food, solids, not relying on milk for their transition anymore. So technically that's what the weaning side of things means. The baby-led is sometimes a little bit confusing because there are different points of view to how much can be baby-led. If you think about what a 6-month-old is capable of, they can't get themselves up into their high chair, they can't open the fridge by themselves, they can't prepare their own food in a way that's actually going to be safe for them to eat. So there's only really part of it that can be purely baby-led. You can offer your child food and they can spit it out, they can swallow it and eat it, or they can mash it all over their face. So that's their choice to do what they like with the food in that moment. But as a parent, we believe that you really do have a big role in guiding and setting the tone for the atmosphere within which they start to have other foods beyond just milk. So with that said, let's look a little bit at what either the readiness signs are. We certainly want to think about it from a developmental and a safety point of view, but just, yeah, so that you know that that's kind of where we're heading with this. So around the world, the introduction of solids looks reasonably similar, although there are some cultural differences in the exact kind of ways that it's done. So developmentally, around the 6-month mark is when baby is needing a little more than just milk and for their full nutrition, but they're also developmentally stronger. They're rolling over, they're able to sit up usually by themselves. They have more strength here, so they can actually physically deal with different textures of food. And so actually being able to hold themselves and kind of sit up reasonably well is one of those safety things that we want to talk about. But also they're going to be noticing more. Developmentally, they're also starting to reach for toys and bring them to their mouth. They can coordinate that. And so they could also technically coordinate that for food. Not that all meals are necessarily easy to eat with your fingers, but in some cultures, that's the main way that they do eat. So that's going to be definitely a personal preference thing. So with those yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and maybe you're probably going to cover it, but just for those two that have been going through the classes, when you talk about the being developmental ready, those are already the things that they are learning. So when they hear somebody else talk about baby-led weaning, I think it's important for our parents to realize the things that they have learned and the begin as you mean to go are kind of good standards to bring themselves back as they're reading and trying to decide, okay, at what point are we going to do this or how much are we going to do of this? So
yeah,
just
absolutely.
Just occurred.
Absolutely. And I think that this is where we get to the difference between the philosophy that's behind the baby-led weaning approach and the skill set that's part of baby being able to be ready and able to either feed themselves or accept food that's offered to them on a spoon or other ways. And so that's where we can look at the those two things. So maybe Anne-Marie, do you want to just talk a little bit about the that kind of difference in philosophy so that we can then come back to the skill side of things?
Sure, and that's something that we want to encourage our moms, well, both parents, mom and dad. From the very beginning, you've been encouraged to think through what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And again, that phrase, begin as you mean to go. So your philosophy, believe it or not, is going to influence so many of your decisions in your parenting. And this is probably after the decision of whether to breast and bottle or whether you're going to have a routine or not. This is probably another one of those big decisions that a parent is going to make. So just kind of keeping that as your guide, not only for this particular season of life, but throughout your parenting. This is just kind of the next baby step, if we could call it that, in how you're going to learn to make decisions that are going to influence your child's life until they're ready to take it over themselves. So, yeah, but developmentally, these very things that you have mentioned already have already been listed in their book. And I'm going to digress just a bit, but as I think of the whole issue of the baby led, I can remember this was quite some time ago. One of our moms in our class, and her child is now in her 30s, but I remember her discussing with Gary saying, oh, but I think my baby needs to feel the textures of the food. So I want, so I mean, and we were at that point, we were just talking purees. So in some ways, there's nothing new under the sun. There's fads that come and go. And I think that's important too, as younger moms, to remember that. You have a brain and you're the parent, and we want to encourage you to be thinking through the process of where it is that you ultimately want to go with certain skills and behaviors.
Linda, can you share some information from current research that's available?
It's really not that old. So first coined by Jill Rapley from the UK in about 2002. She started to talk about this, and it's been, expanded on by other people. But part of that Baby Knows Best, and Baby is aware of, how to monitor their own appetites and all of those kind of things. There's talk now about, like, the research says that babies who are raised with baby-led weaning will have less issues with fussy eating and obesity, and know when to stop. And I think it's pretty early on for the those children that started on that are only now in their early 20s, or so that is still pretty new in that regard. And it's going to be interesting to see what the balance kind of works out like. But I think words are important, and when we're looking at parenting philosophies and parenting things, when you start to read things like, well, spoon feeding your child is force feeding them, or those kind of things, like it can make your mama heart feel guilty, that you are, maybe I'm getting something wrong in the way that this is, the way that I'm approaching my child. And that's where being a thinking parent about your approach to them. I mean, is it possible to force feed a child? Of course it is. Is it possible to force feed with breastfeeding or with bottle feeding? Yes, it is. But that's certainly not the approach that we're advocating. And, we don't want to force our children into things, but we do want to guide them and be, providing good options for them and leading them in a way that helps them to get healthy.
Karen, can you define baby-led weaning and share your thoughts about this meaning?
I did a lot of research. I mean, I only heard of baby-led weaning just reading over the BabyWise Facebook pages. I heard mamas saying I use baby-led weaning. I didn't even know what it was. And then my daughters, as they've had their babies, they brought it up again, and I really didn't know a whole lot about it. And like I say, when Alicia asked the question, it was like, let me just see what this is. I mean, The name I didn't necessarily particularly agree with, but I
Mm.
thought, okay, well, let's see the philosophies behind it. I think the simplest definition that I came up with, and it was kind of across the board in anything related to baby led. I mean, like Linda already mentioned, all the signs of readiness for babyhood transitions, and Cleveland Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, all these places, they were all very, very similar to look for, can your baby sit up? Can your baby hold their head up? Can they even sit up just supported might even be helpful. Like bringing toys to mouth, that's true. But the definition for baby-led weaning in the simplest form was baby-led weaning puts baby in charge of mealtime. That can mean skipping spoon feeding pureed foods and jumping right into enjoying solids with the rest of the family. So that's the very simplest definition and they all were very similar to that. And like I say, the red flag immediately in that definition for me was puts baby in charge. Because like Linda mentioned, how can they? They can't get their own food. They can't, make their own food. They don't decide necessarily what to eat. And so, and it does, like it was already mentioned, go contrary to what we've been, they've been taught already. So I'm thinking you can't really make that direct move. But a lot of what otherwise was introduced and the summary of baby-led weaning actually probably concurred with a lot of what we've learned in preparation for babyhood transitions. And so, it was like a very much of a mixture, and it required wisdom and discernment on the part of the parents as to, which approach to use. And obviously, I think logic, you know what I mean? Nobody wants their baby to choke, by eating something they shouldn't. And, they obviously at some point, at least in America, need to learn to use a spoon and a fork. And so they want to feel the spoon and the fork in their mouth. And I'm thinking of all the whole philosophies. If you're talking about preparation for parenting and baby-wise babies, it has been a parent-directed approach of establishing healthy hunger metabolisms. And some of the things I read were contrary to that. It was give your baby the bottle because, as already mentioned, the bottle is the primary source of food. And then an hour later, give them their solids. And to me, that's kind of disrupting a feed, wake, sleep pattern that you're just coming out of because you're creating a snack feeder. You want that all to be clustered together. You want to have the breast or bottle, and then you want to have the solids as close behind as possible so that the next meal they're ready to eat again. And so some of the characteristics of, like I say, baby-led weaning lined up to a degree, like what kind of food you want to start with. And, that could be very much debatable, depending on the development of the child. But what, the basic baby being in charge, they're going to know what to eat and what to swallow. And, it's kind of like they'll swallow what they're able to swallow, I would hope. In my experience, like I say, I'm a mom of 4. I had 4 babies, and we started with, very milky cereal. But baby-led weaning says, don't do cereal, you know what I mean? And then, we moved into the vegetables, and one by one, you introduce them every few days to watch for allergies. That was nothing new. You watched for reactions to what you're offering them. But knowing that the PDF philosophy was the parent directed, that's the word, or parent guided, you were moving away from that, and you wanted to be careful about stepping too far away from that to where you give baby more control, because the word control, the baby controls what they eat. And obviously parents have more wisdom. They're older, they're wiser. They know the nutritional needs of the baby, and it increases obviously as they start solids. They're going to gradually, very slowly eat less at the bottle, which Linda will cover when she talks about, the process of mom producing milk that could lessen that.
Hey, Karen, you introduced a very interesting point there about allergies. I'm going to ask Linda to share with us from her experiences what the current research is about introducing allergies, particularly dairy and nuts, because we know that is a concern for many parents as they introduce solids. When to do it? Should they wait to 12 months? Should they introduce it at 6 months? or when? Linda, can I ask you to take the conversation from here?
Certainly the early introduction of allergens information is one of the things that has changed quite a bit over the last probably 10 years. In 2015, there was a really big research study done in the UK where they compared with thousands of parents, one group that did the traditional or the conventional kind of approach to just introducing, one food at a time, not very long. And then, as Alicia mentioned, no dairy until this time, no nuts until this time, all of that. And then the other group was having a smidge of this and a smidge of that from quite early on. So things like a little bit of eggs from, 6-7 months, a little bit of peanut butter, and gradually those like early introduction, those early allergen foods were introduced in small amounts. And if you think, if you go to a doctor for a health, for a skin prick test with that you're trying to figure out what allergic reactions you have, then the way that they overcome that, once they know what your allergy is, say it's to spider bites or whatever, or something, whatever it is, some kind of food, is they give you a little bit and often so that your body can gradually build up that lesser histamine response. And so it's the same approach with babies. And certainly the numbers of asthma and eczema and some of those other kind of allergic reactions were lessened a lot when this different approach was given. So that is one area where the research really has backed up this change in approach to giving a wider variety of things from a younger age. But you still want to do that obviously in a safe way, and as Karen mentioned, not adding like everything all at once, because you can't tell which is the one that's the issue. But maybe early on you do a little bit of peanut butter on the side, or put a little bit of peanut butter with their banana or their oatmeal or whatever it is, and actually gradually start introducing some of those high allergen things.
Hey, Anne-Marie, can I ask you, what are some of the cons in relation to baby-led weaning compared to parent-directed approach of introducing solids?
Obviously, one of the cons, I guess you would say, is it's definitely messier. So, is this how you want your meal times to look? At what point are you going to then retrain your child to eat? Yeah, and at least for whatever the culture is, obviously, I think it was Linda that mentioned that there are some cultures, they start, most of their foods are finger foods, and so that's how their culture eats. But for the majority of our audience at this point, at some point they are going to be expected to use a spoon and a fork and know how to use a knife in time, and the instruments that are used within the cultures that we are familiar with. So, at what point and how are you going to do that? So I think that's something that our parents, that definitely is part of your worldview. We don't often think of parenting as having a worldview, but it does. So.
I think that mess, I guess, originates with, a child who, and my grandchildren, they would both, I think both girls would attest to this. When you give them food in their hands, they're going to be messy with it. They're just, when you feed them with a spoon, there is going to be a degree of mess, but it's going to be a little less because the parent is putting it in their mouth and wiping what they spit out as they learn to swallow it. They're going to wipe it off with the spoon, put it back in. And so it's just a little neater process than just giving them food on their tray and letting them, I guess, have a free for all with it. And so it's not only all over their face, it's all over their hands. And many times it's all over the area around them. So that's a main difference between, which we'll probably cover that in the differences, is, PDF is parent directed in that you give them the food and then you make sure it's balanced nutritionally, and you make sure that they understand that I came away with baby-led weaning was embrace the mess. Whereas PDF is manage the mess. And I think there's a big difference to those two.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're going to teach them, you're going to hold their little hands down when they go to, when you're spoon feeding them. You're going to, with one hand, hold their hands so they're not, trying to grab the spoon or getting food everywhere. I know that my daughters have taught Reagan has taught Silas hands on tray, you know what I mean? And it's been a process of teaching him because he's a little wild man, keep their hands on their tray. We've noticed that with Silas, that if you give him a small amount at a time, at least I did, I noticed this when I took care of him. If you give him on his tray, if you give him finger foods or chunky or soft foods on his tray, just a few at a time, and when he eats those, give him a few more, you have less mess than if you just give him a divided dish with several options and he's going through all of it. It's just a little less of a mess. So there's ways to manage the mess than to necessarily embrace the mess.
And I think that that's somewhere where this is really a preference issue. It's not a moral issue as much. Like some people just have a little more tolerance for mess than others. Or some people might be like, I'm okay with a little bit of mess as they're learning, because developmentally, we're not expecting our children to be perfect from 7 months or 6 months. And I know that's not what Karen's saying, but I think the way of thinking about managing it a little so that it doesn't become like all over the place. And we're certainly not saying mess is evil or anything like that. Like that's not the case. But it, and what we were maybe used to with doing more spoon feeding, there was less mess. So the mess side of it, I think, is sometimes feels a little weird to us, and some children just are more coordinated at a younger age, and some kids just need a bit more practice. So you might choose what things like Karen said, you might choose what foods you actually let them practice with.
Using the spoon, you make it a little spoiled because it's easy to, use the spoon and manage the mess more than letting them make the big mess. But the reality is they have to progress to learn to do some more feeding of themselves. So you have to go through that sometimes. I think it's like Anne-Marie said, keeping your end goal in mind, beginning as you intend to go. Eventually they may go somewhere else to eat other than your home. And yes, certain personality types don't like the mess. I'm probably one of them, get overwhelmed with the mess. And so you tend to be more, I guess, diligent at teaching them to manage it, just because, it's hard for 3 meals a day to have to clean up that much all the time. But anyway, so there's an advantage. Yes, you're right, Linda. There's advantage to long-term, I think, to managing the mess, because let's face it, the high chair is one of the first places that our children begin to learn the virtue of self-control.
Hey, let's introduce Reagan and Cassidy now, and just ask them, as young mums with little ones at the moment, how they have introduced baby-led weaning with a balanced approach with parent-directed feeding. Cassidy, can you start?
Certainly, yeah. So I'm Cassidy Cottle. I have a 13-month-old daughter who is such a joy right now. She's really fun. Developmental stage is just so fun right now. But yes, my husband and I live in Knoxville for the last 2.5 years, and we're really loving it here. But yeah, we introduced solids around the 6-month time frame, looking for those indicators that were mentioned previously. I guess my biggest goal with introducing food was nourishment, which isn't it everyone's. So I did a lot of research on how to, or what to introduce in the first place. And I will say I don't know if you want to include this or not, I am a nurse. However, I am more non-conventional nurse, more on the crunchy side, a little bit of an almond butter mom. And so with that in mind, I was mostly concerned with the nutrient density of what I was offering. I did go by Weston A. Price research, which is definitely non-conventional. One of the first foods that they recommend for the ability for those foods to boost brain health and help with the developmental stage that they're in is egg yolks and beef liver. And I know that's very unconventional, but that was what we introduced for the first bit. But of course, that was on a spoon, actually. We did, I did a little bit of powdered beef liver on a spoon with some egg yolk. And so that was her first food. However, the reason why I wanted to incorporate some solids on the early side of things was for the same concept of begin as you mean to go, because obviously all of our goals is for our child to eat what we are eating. And we as humans and adults eat both a mixture of, you know, solid, semi-solid, puree, soups, all the things. So that was one of the reasons why I incorporated it early. I because of, you know, reading the book and the parent directed, I also was not a fan of the name of baby led weaning at all. It wasn't necessarily my goal at all to make it about Evangeline, my daughter, leading the way, because I still controlled what she ate, I controlled when she ate, and I controlled how much as well. And that's another philosophy of baby-led weaning that is not, that I personally didn't follow, because I think everyone's child would eat berries constantly. They would just fill themselves up with berries. So I mean, you have to have a
granddaughter did that the other day, and oh my goodness, my granddaughter did that the other day, and what came out the other end was quite spectacular.
Oh my goodness, that is the truth for sure. Yeah, so I mean, being a nurse, I'm concerned about nutrient density, I'm concerned about blood sugar balance, and so some of the things that I am concerned about is, whoa, I don't want my child eating just berries because that's not good for their blood sugar, you know. So some of the ways that I combated that was to usually offer the protein first and then offer the carb second, and using my mom's strategy of a little at a time did help cut down with the mess. But like I said, probably for the first month or so, I started with purees. And, you know, once she kind of got used to that, then we incorporated the solids a little bit at a time. Kind of did a mixture of the two until we reached mostly, I mean, she mostly feeds herself now. And the beauty of it is that I've found decreased stress during meals because I'm able to eat with her instead of feeding her and then trying to feed myself at the same time. I think it also models how to chew properly, how to swallow properly, how much I'm teaching her right now, how to proportion the amount of food that she stuffs in her face. So I you know, I'm trying to teach her self-control to not put too much in her mouth at one time, and modeling how to chew well before swallowing. So that's one of the things that I liked about it. I will say, as far as the choking hazard went, I followed this app that might be helpful, and Reagan knows as well. It's called Solid Starts, and it's free. There's a paid version of it as well. However, it will show you how to present the food in a safe way for their developmental stage. So between 6 to 9 months, there's a certain way that you would present it versus 9 to 12 months, and then beyond, it'll show you from there. So that was very helpful. I personally think it's really important for any mom, regardless of whether you're presenting with purees or solids or doing the baby-led weaning fully, to take a CPR class and make sure that you know how to help a choking child. I think even just the choking part, you can learn very easily on YouTube, practice it a little bit, and you're good to go. I think that's very wise. We can't depend on EMS to come at the time that you need to save your child. So that was a caveat, but it's important.
Hey, thanks, Cass. That was really cool to hear your journey. Reagan, can I turn the conversation over to you? Let's hear your journey about introducing solids.
So I'm Reagan. I have an 11-month-old, and I'm clinging to that because on Monday he will be a 1-year-old, and I can't quite put that in my mind yet. But yes, his name is Silas, and my husband and I are absolutely delighted in him. And we love to share him. So we were going through the feeding journey, starting at 6 months, we decided to introduce purees. It was logical. He wasn't ready to start anything other than pureed food, and we were ready to control the nutrients that went into his body, because that's what we had established, all through full feedings, all through good naps, all through, we had like gotten to that point, right? His belly was full, he was taking wonderful naps, and so we wanted to continue to establish that as we gave food. If that were to have shifted, I think I would have had a little bit of a sore spot. Like, no, like I want his belly full. And so that's kind of how we took on the feeding journey. It was like, he isn't capable of eating solid foods. He's a new eater. We're going to start with purees, and we're going to teach him what a full belly feels like with food rather than milk. Like, what does that look like? And introduce food slowly but surely. I, unlike Cass, had like the panic moments halfway through where I'm like, oh, he's 6, I'm like, he's 6.5 months. And I'm still feeding purees. It's like not even that far. And I'm like, I'm still feeding purees, and it's really only one meal a day. I'm like, will it ever end? And I did a little bit more research and talked to Cass and learned about the Solid Starts app and talked to my husband. And it was like, really, it would be wise to show him large pieces of food in some ways so he can learn how the jaw works. Right now he's learning opening and closing around a spoon, and that's great, but like long term we do want him to feed himself. Long term we do want him to establish learning how to chew things. So what does that look like? So we really dove into the Solid Starts app. That did give me a lot of confidence to try. So I'd been feeding pureed broccoli. Say we went into 7 months, I'd been feeding pureed broccoli. Well, what would it look like to feed him a soft piece of broccoli? One piece, I control that. I don't give him, a whole head of broccoli, but what does it look like if I feed him that? And what does it look like as he's developing all the things? He's developing the pincher grasp. He's developing, patience at his high chair. I had a very my hands, actually, he still does this. My hands are going to go everywhere, son. And so during mealtime, it was very important for us, put your hands on the tray, keep them out of the way. We need to learn that too. So what does that look like when we're also giving him a food to eat? So really, after we established purees and moved into the 8-month-old, we really started hitting home with the finger foods. What was recommended to me, and I thought it worked really well, is to establish a routine of when you serve the finger foods. So I had to do a little bit of research on this of okay, some meals I'm feeding him a puree and then a finger food, and sometimes I'm feeding him a finger food and then a puree. That could be kind of confusing for me. And so as I was getting guidance, my husband and I made the decision, at every meal, we're going to feed him a puree, a nutrient dense puree, and then we're going to feed him a finger food to follow. That way he's getting most of his nutrients through the puree. The finger food is solely coming alongside as kind of him learning. He's certainly not going to be competent of filling his belly on his own. So now that his belly's full of puree, let's do kind of a practice. And so that was a predictable pattern that my husband and I just thought we need to be doing this, because we can't just be sporadic every meal. We were incorporating a second, maybe even third meal at that time. And it was no, we need to have a predictable routine. And it was actually funny because now, once we got into 10 or 11 months, as he really was eating pretty well with the finger foods and filling his belly up pretty full, we swapped that. So now he's able to join us for meals, most of our meals, but on the meals of breakfast and lunch, he actually feeds himself. And then I follow through with some purees. So I've actually swapped that just as a finishing, and then he's done, but I don't have to feed very much. And now we've kind of tossed that out the door. But setting predictable routines has been very, very helpful for him. And now, I do. I limit food on the tray, and I start with nutrient dense foods first. And I think that is parent directed. Like in the end, you don't just let your child go for the, I don't know, the berry yogurt first. I mean, of course they're going to want the berry yogurt. Like, you know, you feed, probably another meal is easier. Like tonight at dinner, we fed him green beans first because he's not going to want the green beans naturally. But if I feed it to him first, he knows no different. I mean, at lunch, I fed him butternut squash and he was like, this is delightful. And then afterwards, he saw the quiche that I had for him and he was like, even better, like thanks. And he just ate it up. So I do think parent directed means you start with the nutrient dense foods first. Don't, you know, be aware of that, control that. I think having the pre-portioned meal for your child is very important. Like I think you can get off track and be like, oh, let me just add this in. Oh, let me try this. Well, that does kind of become baby-led weaning because you don't know if your child is full yet or not. You don't know how much food you've even offered them. So I think having a confined bit of food prepared has been very helpful for us. So that then we know we can start with the nutrient dense foods first and then finish off with maybe the protein that he may not prefer, but that's going to fill him up and be really helpful for him. So we right off the bat, I mean, we decided kind of combo feeding. If someone were to ask me like, oh, are you going to do baby-led weaning? I would have probably looked at them and been like, no, like I'm doing a combination of purees, which I think is helpful for him to fill his belly up. And then he's practicing and experimenting with real food per my supervision. So I don't really have any technical terms to it, but that's what we've been doing. And we have a child at 11 months who's eating dinners with us, and Cass is right, it completely takes the stress off, I believe, and helps them learn to observe and greater step into that privilege of joining you at the dinner table, but it is controlled by mom and dad. So yeah, that's what we've done.
Hey, thanks, Reagan. That was really great to hear part of your journey. Linda, I'm going to turn the conversation back to you now. As a lactation consultant, I'd just like to hear your thoughts about milk supply challenges around this age bracket of about 6 to 7 months. Because I know myself, I had some milk supply issues around this age, and I'd just like to ask you to share your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, so great opportunity to start with egg yolk and beef liver, I think, actually, for babies. It's really interesting. I love hearing just like that transition of remembering that this is from like 6 to 12 months, this process that's happening. And you heard both Cassidy and Reagan describe that really beautifully in terms of like some of the things you might start with. You know, over the next several months, you gradually are doing things. As that pincer grip comes in at 8 months, you know, you've got a lot more, option of them being able to participate in that well and be more coordinated. But the milk supply side of things is interesting. And I think actually some of the description of what happens with iron in breast milk in the second 6 months is not necessarily super accurate, because what actually happens is the bioavailability of that iron from breast milk is way better than it is from a lot of foods. So although the amount might be smaller, the percentage that they get from it is higher. So so just from that point of view, during that 6 to 12 month mark, obviously still super important to be either having the milk or the, breast milk or formula is a part that gradually, probably closer to the 10 to 11 to 12 months, starts to kind of dissipate as they really start eating a lot more. But you've got around the 5 to 6 month mark, you've got the three big terrible things that happen as far as making life a little trickier for you as a breastfeeding mama. If you're doing that, you've got baby is becoming more distracted. They're just like, oh my goodness, all these fun things around. And so distracted feeding, and how that also influences naps in terms of like waking up at that kind of halfway through their nap and all the things solids are happening and having maybe a little bit of trouble getting back to naps. So sometimes you go through that transition of the 45-minute intruder, kind of really there, you know, a lot more aware of what's going on. Sometimes, and if you're having these nice long nighttime feedings as well, sometimes the length of that is really kicked in around the sort of 3, 4, 5 month mark. You're getting maybe 10 to 12 hours. And so for some mamas, the combination of those things plus starting solids can trigger your milk supply really kind of regulating a little bit more so that your period starts again. And when your period starts again, the hormone cycles that come with your period actually dips your milk supply a little bit more, just usually temporarily, but then it needs a little bit of help sometimes to kick back up again to be adequate. And so when you have all of these things happening at once, we want to think about, for some mamas, the breast storage capacity that you have, which is not your cup size, but just like your storage capacity. For some mamas, that means that maybe more frequent feedings need to happen for a little bit longer to maintain your milk supply at a certain level. And there's different ways you can do that. That doesn't mean you have to go back to feeding every 3 hours, but it does mean that you might maybe pop a pumping session in a couple of times and use that milk in their solids, like to mix with the oatmeal or to mix in with to make their veggies nice and creamy, or whatever that you do with it. Or they might have like an ounce or a small amount in a cup along with their meals. But it's also doing the job of just helping support your milk supply if that's starting to drop off. So there's two things that kind of happen. One is that storage capacity, but the other is, for some mamas, the length of time, the longest length of time between feedings or between pumpings, that can trigger a downward go in your milk supply. If you're okay with that and you want to do some combo feeding with some formula, that's totally your decision. If you want to keep the breastfeeding going a little bit longer, then figuring out a couple of ways to be able to just support that so that you can keep that going for longer might need a slightly different approach.
Hey, I know myself, I kept my dream feed in around that age because I know that helped with my milk supply, particularly when I was running around with other kids as well, my older children. I know it really, really helped. Thanks for that, Linda.
One thing I did want to mention is just to make it really clear some of the ways that the baby-led weaning philosophy or the ideas behind it can work really, really well with a parent-directed approach. And I think one of the key ones is actually around children being a welcome member to the family, and the idea of children being a part of the family meal. And I think the earlier that happens, the better. Like, you know, for our granddaughter, there was at least one meal a day where even if she wasn't eating very much at all, you know, like it didn't kind of work in terms of the timing, she was still at the table in the high chair, maybe having a few pieces of something, you know, not necessarily a full meal. It didn't matter that it wasn't specifically her feed time, but she was having a few mouthfuls of this and a few mouthfuls of that and participating in the family meal. And I think that side of it is actually really, really, really great. And then just from a nutritional point of view, as Cassidy was saying, starting with some of those really great options, like one of the first ones that our granddaughter had was marrow and beef broth. Like those were some of the, and she just loved soups early on. Her mama would make these amazing nutritious soups, and she loved marrow. Oh my goodness. And you kind of think, oh gosh, you know, that's kind of weird. Aren't we supposed to start with rice cereal? But you know, I agree. I think having some of those other things, and certainly the vegetable options with meat gravies, are really great nutritionally for them and good for the gut. Actually probably better than some of the cereals. So I think, and especially rice cereal. So those I think are really good things to remember, that there are some of those key things that can be well used within the parent-directed kind of guidance framework.
I'd like to bank off that if I could. in talking with our pediatrician, we're going to see her again at the 1.5 year mark, so 18-month mark. And she also made the point of eventually you're going to drop breast milk formula, whatever that looks like. Now we've moved to such big meals, he's on formula, but you can transition straight to broth. And she actually made a point that it's better to switch to the broths and the marrows and those more nutrient dense foods, because the calcium in milk can override the magnesium in your body and conflict with nighttime sleep for small children. And I had never heard of that before. And I was very grateful to hear that, because that confirmed that I'd been giving Silas broth. And it was like, oh, that will make the transition so much easier than when we are done with bottle, that we can just transition straight away to water and broth. And I also, in my notes, I hadn't brought up the Solid Starts app and how it compares to teeth development in your child, which every child is different in when and what time they get teeth. But I do appreciate, I like the term Solid Starts over baby-led weaning. I would never say I did like baby-led weaning would be attractive to me, but Solid Starts is a great thing. Like, yes, you should be kind of working your way to starting your child on solid. So all that to say, the app gives age ranges very similar to the baby transitions book of like, here is an age, here's an approximation that we're making of at this age, you will be able to give your child this or whatever. And they're making no assumptions as to teeth. And so even some of the suggestions that they were giving regarding a certain food, I was like, oh, like Silas isn't even close to that because he has no teeth. Like that's not wise. That's not a good choice at this time in his development. So now he's 11 months and he just got his first 3 teeth. And now I'm like, okay, now we can start moving into more of those things. But that does become parent directed, because you're making an observation and you're saying, hey, my child is not yet at the place that they can start biting into a sub sandwich. So like, let's backtrack and see what's actually like useful for those teeth, doesn't interrupt teeth development, and just gets us, beginners you mean to go, gets us in the direction of joining us at family meals and not having pasta all over the walls.
In all of this, we want parents to be discerning. We want them to get the information they receive on the internet, parents' advice, what they read, and discern. It's a discussion between husband and wives. It's a discussion to see how it fits with their worldview, but also how it fits with their family. And when parents are introducing solids, it needs to be a decision that is made that is helpful and it fits with their family. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Anne-Marie, Karen, Linda, Cassidy, and Reagan for sharing their thoughts and sharing their journeys. It has been a pleasure to have this conversation together and to know that this is going to benefit parents and benefit leaders and contact mums in sharing with young parents these days about how baby-led weaning fits with a parent-directed approach of introducing solids.